is the Investor Connect podcast program. This is Hall T. Martin. I'm the host of the show, in which we interview angel investors, venture capital, private equity, family offices, and many other investor groups for startups and growth companies. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you for joining us. Well, hello, this is Hall Martin with Investor Connect. Today we're here with Barry Etra, president of Keiretsu Forum Southeast. Keiretsu Forum is a global investment community of accredited private equity angel investors, venture capitalists, and corporate institutional investors. Keiretsu Forum is a worldwide network of capital, resources, and deal flow with 53 chapters on 4 continents. Keiretsu Forum members invest in high-quality, diverse investment opportunities. Barry, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me, Hall.
Great. So can you share with us a bit about your journey from the manufacturing sector to becoming entrenched in the early stage investment community?
Sure. So I was a manufacturing guy for a bunch of years and working in packaging, both corrugated and plastic packaging. I came down to Atlanta to run a blow molded and injection molded plastics plant, which in the parlance was an offer I could have refused, but got us down here. It turned out it was a bit of a mess. They bought me out a year and a half in, and I went around looking for something to do. I found a platform specific to small companies as a consultant and went to get training on that in New Jersey, came back down here, had 2 or 3 clients, and got involved in the early stage alternative funding world because companies didn't know how to get certain loans. They couldn't find the right partner. They couldn't find the people who even did those loans, and got more and more involved in that. It took over my life. And then 2008, 9, 10 hit, and there was nowhere to go. Almost all of the lenders stopped lending, and that included banks to a large degree. So somebody suggested, why don't you get involved in the early stage world? You can do the same thing you're doing here, there. You can match up early stage companies with investors and vice versa. And I dove in full force, but became clear after only a few months that there was no future in this. The companies didn't know the investors didn't know the companies, and there was no structured forum in which they could meet. And of course, my consultant had kicked in, and I said, I know how to fix this. I came up with a way to make it work for everybody on an even playing field. And that became the Raise Forum, which right now, for the last 9.5 years, has been running at Emory Business School. And while I was at Raise, I spent some time going around the country looking for models to see if I could learn something. Somebody suggested, why don't you go to the Keiretsu Forum website. They're the best in the world. And I went to their website and went, this is interesting. Sent them an email, lobbed in a phone call, sent another email. That was 10 years ago. I still haven't heard back from them. But life is funny. And they came into Atlanta a year and a half later. And one of the prominent law firms here became their host sponsor. And they asked the venture partners there, who should run this in Atlanta? And they said, Barry Etra. And so that's how that happened. And life is funny, but it's been a straightforward line ever since.
So what motivated you to pivot your career towards supporting early stage venture? What was the higher force behind this story?
I was near the end of my career and looking for something else. And at this point, I wanted to do what I liked. And I had gotten involved with early stage companies for free for years. And I thought, this is fun. I like advising the companies. I like finding out about new things. I really enjoyed learning about all this. I'm pretty much a lifelong learner. And this is great. I can put together not only my talents in connecting, but my talents in working with them on the finance, working with them on the steps. And I had already collected the majority of the people in this world in the Southeast. And I thought, great, this is a place I can make a difference.
Great. So, as Vice President of Entrepreneur Services for the East Coast, how do you approach supporting a wider range of entrepreneurs and ventures?
So, starting a little over a year ago, I became, on top of being president of the Atlanta chapter, the vice president of entrepreneur services to the East Coast. And that means I'm the first touch point for most companies that apply to Keiretsu. And I help work them into the process, negotiate them through the process, and following up with them and getting the details we need to do this. It's an incredible amount of detail, unfortunately. But it's good because the companies, I think, get more out of this process than they would ever admit to. They are learning and getting better every day that they go through the Keiretsu process. It's really set up that way. I've also learned a lot more about what investors want, which I think is very important. The one thing I find about companies in general is they don't know what investors would want. Keiretsu is great for the Southeast in particular because we don't have a lot of, certainly in the angel side, we basically have no Series A and Series B funds. On the venture side, we have some, but not nearly enough groups. Keiretsu in less than 3 years became the number one investor in terms of dollars in the Southeast. And now that's a place for companies to move to. And I'm pretty passionate about the Southeast. The Southeast, I think Atlanta could be the number 4 ecosystem in the country. Silicon Valley, Boston, New York, and then Atlanta. We have all the pieces here. What we don't have is the Series A and Series B funding. So Keiretsu has jumped right in to do this. It's now a process of education to get the companies understanding how Keiretsu works, how it's different, and how it can help them.
So, Keiretsu Forum is known for its rigorous company vetting process for investments. Can you explain this process and how does it benefit investors and entrepreneurs?
So Keiretsu does the best due diligence in the angel investment world. It is as comprehensive as it gets. It really helps the companies because they have to think about things they've often never thought about, and they have to put it in a usable form. And almost all the due diligence is done by members. And it's usually members who want to be investors because they want to learn as much as they can about the company before putting their money in. So the process is, there are literally hundreds of fields that need to be filled out. The companies fill that out initially. When companies present, the members and guests indicate if they're interested in being part of due diligence and also if they're interested in investing. We collect those, we help the companies contact the people, and we then create due diligence teams. We have to find a lead who is an expert in the space, but Keiretsu has 2,000 members in North America alone, so that's usually not a problem. So the companies learn a lot about themselves from the questions we end up asking. They certainly learn a lot about what appeals to investors, us in particular, and probably other investors as well. And on the investor side, you get more and more opportunities to be really part of the process and really shape the way the company puts itself out to the world. We are very passionate about making the process better for companies.
So, when it comes to making investment decisions, how collaborative is this process among the Atlanta chapter members? Is there a structured approach, or do members operate more independently?
A little of both, Paul. During the meetings, when the companies present, there's plenty of give and take. There's an extensive question and answer section, and there is also the opportunity to do a breakout with the company directly with other members there present so you can ask those questions. We also go through, after the company presents and the Q&A is done, we do something we call mind share, which is essentially trying to get everybody on the same page. And at that point, we take positive, we take negative, and then we come up with a last question asked the company, which they have to answer at the end of the meeting, that answers a bunch of concerns or interests for the people who are at the meeting. So that part of it's pretty structured. We then often send out an email for people who couldn't make the meeting, who want to learn more about the company. And often when companies, in fact, almost all the time, when companies finish their due diligence, they come back and do an update, which is saying, hey, here's where we are at this point. Here are the members of the due diligence team, which are your own contemporaries who helped us do this process. And we're taking effect now. So people get another shot at the company. In general, not if you don't do those ports, members operate pretty independently. Keiretsu, 95% of the time, negotiates the term sheet with the company, and the companies then, the members invest directly in the company through that term sheet. So that part of it's independent. Almost nobody really knows who is invested in what unless the member volunteers that.
So, Barry, could you describe the typical profile of early stage company investors in the Keiretsu Forum, particularly those in the Atlanta chapter?
Wow. Well, that kind of defies description. We're kind of all over the place. We have a mixture of people who are early stage investors. That's what they like to do. It's kind of a sideline. We have a few funds and family offices, because Keiretsu is great for that, because Keiretsu does all the work for them. And we don't have a typical profile per se. I think in Atlanta, we tend to have members who are already doing something else, working in another job. Is that you can be a investor. I mean, we encourage that, but you can also be an investor who just says, hey, this philosophy of investing and due diligence makes a ton of sense. We have mutual funds and sector mutual funds that somebody could invest in if they don't have the time to spend more time.
Right. Well, in your experience, what motivates these investors to get involved in early stage investments, and what are they looking for in potential ventures?
Some of them are very particular about what they want. We encourage diversification. And of course, that's right out of the HCA, Angel Capital Association playbook. The more diversified you are, the better return you're going to get. Same in some ways as the stock market. So some of them get in there because if you are doing something which is inherently risky, I mean, angel investing is the highest returning asset class, but it's inherently risky. Keiretsu de-risks that to an enormous degree. The failure rate that we see in companies at Keiretsu is a fraction of what you see in most other groups. So what motivates the investors here, I think it's a structured system. You see more great companies. I think the deal flow at Keiretsu is clearly better than any other I've seen anywhere else. And they're looking for very specific things in Keiretsu. They're looking for that due diligence. They want to see that package. They want to see the detail. Like Keiretsu due diligence can be 100 plus pages long. And then a lot of them want to give back. They've been involved in this world. We do have people who have looked at this and said, I don't make the kind of returns I should be making. This process, I think, will work better. So some of them do it for that reason. Not enough, frankly. There could be more.
Well, so based on your experience, what emerging trends do you foresee in the early stage investment landscape, especially there in the Southeast?
Great news about the Southeast is growing. When we started in Atlanta with Raise, there were basically, if you were a fintech company or if you were a cybersecurity company, you had a chance of getting funding. That is still fairly dramatically, although not enough to quote unquote threaten the big three. But there are more investors moving into the Southeast. There are more early stage investors, which is a good thing. There is much more interest, certainly in the city of Atlanta, around early stage investing. We're doing a lot more healthcare in the Southeast than we ever did. And that's good because there are not enough knowledgeable healthcare investors down here. We have a few in Atlanta, and I think we're the largest repository of healthcare investors in the Southeast, but that's still a small number. So more healthcare. They've built out a huge campus west of Midtown in Atlanta called Science Square, which could generate a lot of interest, and that'll bring more investors in, and it'll bring more big companies in, which is a good thing because that's where you get some of the employees you'll need to make this work.
Great. Well, lastly, Barry, what last thoughts or advice would you like to share with our private equity investors and early stage entrepreneurs listening today?
One of the things about this world is that for many years it was a follow me strategy. If you were an investor, you would know somebody else and they would say, hey, I'm in this great company, you should invest in it. Not exactly a scientific way to do this. What I admire about Keiretsu is they've gone through, and the founder he thought this through and said, how do you make this work in a way that people have enough great choices, can invest as much as want, they can get in for as little as $25,000 or less if we establish some kind of single purpose vehicle. And you can diversify without having to do it all yourself. We'll give you the information, we'll set it up, you'll know where to go. And it's a great script for investing because you know that this process works. Keiretsu's been the largest angel investor in the world for many years in that group, for many years. And it's only because it works. And I think it's worth trying. It's worth a look. And if you look at it and you dot the I's and cross the T's, you'll find out it's a better experience. And I think you'll have much higher return.
So what advice would you give listeners interested in learning more about Keiretsu Forum for attending a meeting? How can they get involved?
Well, for anybody interested in Southeast, I'm very happy to talk to anybody. My phone number is 770-722-9787. My email is betra@keiretsuforum.net. I spend most of my day talking to people. I can really steer people, I think, in the right direction. And I can also tell them when it might not be. And again, I'm happy to do that personally.
Great. We'll include your contact details in the show notes. I want to thank you for joining us today, and we hope to have you back for a follow-up soon.
Thank you, Paul.
Investor Connect helps investors interested in startup funding. In this podcast series, experienced investors share their experience and advice. You can learn more at investorconnect.org. Paul T. Martin is the director of Investor Connect, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors for early stage funding. All opinions expressed by Hall and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Investor Connect. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.